Hello, I'm glad I can welcome Delphine Colard, Deputy Spokesperson of the EU Parliament. We are doing an interview on fake news. My name is Monika. I'm working for Novi List in Croatia, and I'm very glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much, Monika, for having me. It's an interesting topic ahead of important democratic elections in the EU. So thank you for inviting me.
We will try to keep this relatively short, so I will start with questions right away. I hope that's fine.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so there are so many different definitions of fake news, but all circle around the concepts of manipulation, distortion of information with the aim to confuse people, create some sort of illusion of consciousness, to cast doubts or draw down other voices. According to your perception, what does fake news actually mean?
Yes, indeed. It's important to know what we are talking about. We try to avoid using the term fake news because it's now being used for political reasons to cast doubts on political claims by opponents. So we really try to avoid that terminology. We try to distinguish also misinformation from disinformation or information manipulation. I think misinformation can be unintentional. It's an information that is not correct, but there is no intention to harm. I think disinformation, information manipulation, you really have there an actor that seeks to deceive through information manipulation. And they seek to deceive can be for different reasons. Can be for economic gain, just because the platform works that way. You know that if you gain a lot of attention through outrageous content, you will just make money out of it. The second aspect is, of course, the one that where we focus our attention on is where the intention that is to deceive is done for political reasons and with a political intent. So there it can be to seek a better image of your entity or your country, but it can also be to sow division or to impact the way that decision making is happening in another entity or inside a country. So that I would use it that way. So we try to avoid fake news and we try to focus on disinformation or information manipulation.
Thank you. I've found your presentation on this information, and I've read about the bad information triangle. Can you please explain what it is?
Yeah, I think what it is important is that you have there is an actor that tries to seek a specific gain through implanting a narratives or using a vehicle to seek a specific gain. Of course, you have the audience on the other hand, and the means that are used are very interesting. It's to analyze also the different tactics, tools, procedures that are used to vehicle this narrative to the audience and make sure that they reach an impact. So this is a bit the idea when you try to analyze what the situation is, how it can affect the information space, is to analyze especially like which audience is targeted, what are the messages, but what we focus our attention on is really the vehicles, is really the tools, the tactics, the procedures that I played upon the information space to distort it. So this is really our point of attention. The members of this European Parliament, where I have the pleasure to work, have really worked on this question of interference and disinformation for the last 5 years. They have had a dedicated committee for the last for 3 years, but they started with their first resolutions in 2015 already, encouraging the development of also a strategic communication department in the External Action Service. So they really also encourage us to look at the different ways that this information can be conveyed. And this is for us important because, of course, what we are looking at is absolutely not statements or expressions, because we should really distinguish opinions that are genuine and are part of the freedom of speech and it's normal. It's very something that we need to secure. That is part of the values enshrined in the treaties of the European Union. But the question of the reach, the question of the distortion of the information space is the point of attention. So it's not the freedom of speech, as Commissioner Jourova says, it's the freedom of reach that we are looking at. Voilà. So again, the members have put at attention, and they have done their work on the legislative side. We'll probably come to it, but we need also to be aware ourselves and do the mapping, as I said, of the different tactics that are played, so that we are better pre-warned and less prone to fall for it.
Okay, thank you. Do you believe that fake news is a concept that has always been a part of disinformation communication, or is it new and more powerful tool that arose with the emergence of new media?
Well, we know that disinformation or propaganda has always been present in all times. It's not new. The new aspect is the speed to which it travels and the different means that are at disposition of people that are seeking to deceive audiences. The way that audiences are shaped through social media, the fact that algorithms creates bubbles that are reinforced in their message because they are only presented with message that would reinforce their preconceptions or that would confirm their biases, because the algorithm provides you content that you would like to click on or share, because that's how they make money. It's basically creates different echo chambers or different bubbles to which it's easy to reach, easier to reach than in the past. Also, information travels way faster, so it's also a vehicle that is way more easy than in the past. But we said that at the moment that TV was invented, it was also used for propaganda, and it reached an additional number of people than it used to be in the past. Now it's massive, it's just global. And the difficulty is that it combines different types of, again, tactics that cannot always be identified easily as a tactic to fool you. It can be cheap fakes, distorting pictures or misleading content, or it can be content placed in a different framework, or it can be sources that are biased, but it can also forge fakes, like, for example, duplicating websites of media, presenting them as a genuine media page. When you are scrolling and you have the impression that you are opening an article from Corriere della Sera or The Guardian, but what you are opening is in fact a page that has been generated by a disinformation actor with a slightly modified URL that provides you a very different narrative. This is a case that is at the moment studied. It's the case of the campaign called Doppelganger, which is pushed by pro-Kremlin actors to push deceptive narratives to disencourage support to Ukraine, for example. And people that can genuinely think that they are clicking on an article that is genuine, and it takes really a lot of checks to kind of say, okay, it's not the case. So the engineering is different and it's way more advanced. The same goes to a limited part of disinformation is now used through artificial intelligence engineered content. And again, it requires additional capacities to detect these as being artificially generated. Again, we can all use artificial intelligence for humor. That is not that. But I think it's important that it's labeled as artificial intelligence generated, so that you can know that it's not a genuine content. This is what the AI Act at European level is seeking. That's the agreement that was reached at EU level to make sure that people can be protected, the consumers can be protected in what they see. I'm sorry, it was a bit long, but
it is okay.
voila.
It's okay. But I mean, I have two questions about what you said right now. So, is social media? It's not new, but does it pose a much larger threat with fake news today? And also, since the example you just mentioned about Russian propaganda, is education something that will help, and can we get educated enough to notice?
Yeah, I would say platforms were a challenge, and that's the reason there were lots of efforts during this legislature by the members of the European Parliament to work on the Digital Services Act, on the Digital Market Act, but also to ensure that through the Digital Services Act, you have a much more control on what the platforms are obliged to follow for rules. It's, for example, to not have their just harming content, but also have clear choices as users of what you are seeing, what the algorithm is pushing on you. It's also making sure that there are incidents management to not have detrimental images. It's also making sure that disinformation can be reported. It's to have additional accesses for researchers to know how algorithm works. So the idea is really to depart from this idea that the platforms, when they were created, were the Wild West. They were considering themselves as a kind of provider, a kind of playground where people could exchange ideas without the responsibility for them to have a role as editor. And we've seen that it can very be detrimental. If you think of the COVID times where you had information there, well, disinformation circulating there that affected directly the life of European citizens, that was giving advices that would harm them or cause their death. That was really a responsibility for the platforms to let their content that was leading to really serious harm. When disinformation triggers major incidents like the storming of the Capitol Hill in the Congress, in the US, it's causing definitely physical harm and direct harm to democracy. So there is a responsibility for the platforms, and they need to assume it. So that's the reason that the EU was the first to come with a very large regulation set to have clear boundaries on, if you want to make trade and be present in the European Union, then there are limits, because we have values, because we are protecting our consumers, because we protect the data of our consumers, but we don't want also them to be exposed to fallacious information that have a detrimental effect on them and it affect their health, for example, directly. It's also making sure, for example, that what the advertisement that you see online, you know who is paying for it. Because at the moment it's political advertisement, you might not always know who is paying to the platforms to see for you to see a specific content. Again, I mentioned the Artificial Intelligence Act to make sure that AI generated content is labeled. I would say this is a whole package around the platforms. And now, of course, it's just entered into force, and the Commission is now very much focusing on the implementation, and the Parliament is looking at it very eagerly to know exactly how it can be impacted and be implemented in full. This is now the essence, is to make sure that these legislations can be functioning in practice and that we see an effect for our citizens. I would say this is for your first question. On a completely different note, I think you were thinking about the importance of, well, education. I would say in general, I'm not only using education, I would say in general, awareness raising, and in general, the fact that we would be informed about the risks of disinformation and what we can do about it is very important. We know that the societies in the European Union, in the countries of the European Union that have a strong media literacy, that have education to media, that have education to the risks of disinformation in their programs, stronger citizenship classes, but also a strong media pluralism and independence of media in their member states, are less prone to fall for disinformation. In Finland, there are classes on how to read the news since very early ages, for example. It's very important. So part of the really efforts that the members of the European Parliament asked us as services to work on from the different institutions to reinforce those efforts on media literacy. So we really work in our little team in the European Parliament, but again, we work with the Commission, we work with the External Action Service, so EU Foreign Affairs, and we are in contact with all the member states. So it's kind of very common efforts, and we know that civil society is also engaged and that media do their share. So it's really a whole of a society effort that is there convened, but we know that we need to talk to people. We need to make sure that when there are visitors coming to Parliament, when there are young journalists coming to Parliament, when they are content creator coming to Parliament, we try also to make them, to sensitize them to this question and give them also basic tips on how they can react. It's also what we try to do online. We have a series of videos that are also explaining the techniques behind disinformation. And we really push it also on TikTok and all the platforms we can to make sure that as many people as possible are pre-warned of the effects that disinformation can have, and can question what they see online with the right tools. It's a bit teaching people the basis of the journalistic method, I would say, as to check the sources, check the author, check if it's reliable, check if other people are talking about it, or if it's completely, I think if it's too good to be true, if it's too bad to be true, by definition, most of the time it's not true. It's questioning elements that reinforce your personal bias too much. So there are tips that we can discuss with several groups we see here. We speak to teachers also and give them material so that they can trigger discussion in the classrooms. We really try to play our role alongside many actors that are engaged in this awareness raising, and to enhance in general the societal resilience in this question. But we know it's the key, because warning people works better than trying to convince them after that there was a problematic information online, because we know that basically we have to work on pre-bunking and making sure also people have also factual information available so that they can make up their mind. So strong journalistic landscape, strong media landscape in member states is another part. And there, if you allow me, Parliament is also working with the other institutions on other legislations, on European Media Freedom Act, on the anti-SLAPP, so the protecting the journalists against abusive lawsuits, to make sure that we can promote a pluralistic and independent media scene in all the member states, so that they can also provide a strong factual basis for citizens to check on information. So this is very important. Another aspect aside the media is the work we do with fact-checking communities. The European Union is supporting an initiative which is called the European Digital Media Observatory. It's hubs of fact-checkers created all around the European Union to put together their exchange their best practices, but also their cases. And it's really useful because we can also dialogue with them and flag potential alerts, but also alerts us of what they see. So it's really useful also for citizens. So I would say it's really this efforts combined by different level, the legislator, the authorities when doing the awareness raising efforts or education, but it's media as a strong media landscape, it's the fact-checking communities. We all have a role to play.
Thank you. So my next question is, what are the biggest technical challenges regarding the detection of fake news? You mentioned that EU is planning on putting signs where AI created the content.
Yeah, we know that like, first of all, there are many techniques and there are many narratives and they are implanted every day. So it's detecting is also a bit anticipating on the vehicle that will be used. So knowing a bit the techniques, knowing also where the platforms developed, where it's going to be implanted, but also a bit to be attentive on the narrative that could be used. We know that any high profile topic where you can create polarization is basically already identified as a potential source for disinformation actors to enhance this polarization or create additional chaos. So we know that any polarizing topic, it can be agriculture these days, but it can be climate, it can be LGBTIQ rights, it can be migration, it can be the questions of vaccination, even if it's not really polarized, but okay, some consider it's the case.
Yeah.
But where people have doubts or where people have fears, that's where people go and search for, go and plant narratives and push. It's of course when there is an interest at stake in a specific war, and on Ukraine, the aggression against Ukraine, there was a whole disinformation campaign to do the buildup to like legitimize the aggression by implanting narratives on the Nazi Ukraine that created the COVID vaccine in US labs. But it was very seriously implanted months before the Russian aggression to also give this idea that it was just justified to invade Ukraine. So it's seeks specific gain. So it's also trying to anticipate how things could be instrumentalized. It's also very important to anticipate how things could be instrumentalized to make sure that we already provide citizens with the right information so that they can themselves pre-bunk and have the factual information to not fall for those narratives. For example, this is something we do ahead of the European elections in the European Parliament. We have an information website that we have built together with all the member states and the other institutions that is called elections.europad.eu. That's available in all the languages. And it's really a website that is there to explain, well, when to vote, how to vote in all the member states. But there is also a section that explains how do we ensure that elections are free and fair. And it outlines all the measures that are taken. It's this type of initiative participates to a better information of the society of the measures that are in place, for example, to protect the elections from potential interference. And we know from experience of the Baltic countries and the Scandinavian countries that it is very important to have reliable information available so that when people see a doubtful thing, they know where to check or they know the information is available and they are referred back to this site. So these types of factual information is we place it there because we know from the past and the analysis we run that, for example, this information, there are pushes but to discredit the way the elections are organized. You remember that from the Trump vote in the US, but it's a narrative that we see across the European member states. And to pre-bunk that, using a very barbaric term, but to anticipate and make sure that people are not falling for that, we need to make sure that the correct information is available and that people have all the tools to be better prepared. So this is, for example, one tool that we have as Parliament ahead of the elections.
Thank you. So could you tell me what would be some of the key methods used to spread disinformation on social media?
Well, there are lots of methods. There is a catalog which is called a Disarm framework that lists like nearly 200 of them. But I want to highlight three. I want to highlight, well, maybe four, but one is playing on emotions. It's going for very emotional content that would confirm your personal bias, but you see something that you are scared of or that you find fantastic or that you really despise, then of course, if you push that content, you trigger a reaction and you trigger engagement. So it navigates, it spreads quite easily. A second thing is beyond playing with emotions is polarization. I already mentioned it. So it's taking any high profile topic or any topic and to basically boost the most extreme viewpoints so that it gives the impression to the people that there are no gray positions, that you cannot have a balanced opinion, that compromises are not possible because you can only choose for this extreme or this extreme and the other viewpoints are basically gradually suppressed. It's a bit what we have seen in the ecosystem in the US information sphere. So the disappearance of a common space where you can create commonalities as a second element, polarization. And the third one I would like to mention is flooding. Flooding is this idea that you just throw as many different interpretations to one fact as possible in the information space, so that people don't know where to find the correct information anymore, who to trust. And we see that, for example, after incidents like the MH17 flight that was shot. We saw like tons of narratives pushed at the same time, that it was this country, that it was an engine problem, that it was this and this, interpretations, just to sow confusion and basically cause people to disengage and say, well, I don't know, so I'm not going to trust anybody anymore. This is for three ones that I wanted to really highlight. Ahead of elections, I want to highlight maybe specific ones, which is pushing a lot of false allegations regarding the vote, how to vote, but that the vote is fraudulent, that there is disappearing ink, that there is a problem with the ballot box, that there is a problem with the computers. This is very common. And a fifth one, if I may, would be seeking disengagement by voters. So seeking voter suppression, telling people, anyway, elites will decide for you, just don't go to vote, but also telling them, oh, there are bomb threats in the school, so maybe you just don't want to go to vote. Or maybe your specific ethnic group or your women in this country will not be listened to, so maybe it's not worth for you to go to elections. So these are specific links to elections that I wanted to highlight on top of emotions, polarization, and flooding.
Thank you. And my last question, since we're almost out of time, how effective is social media disinformation in political campaigns?
Well, we assume it has an impact because they continue to do it. But we also have to say we are very lucky in the European Union because we have a quite resilient information space with trusted media, with independent media, but also safeguards in the legislation, safeguards in the way that we organize elections with very strong electoral authorities that cooperate with each other, that join their forces and exchange best practices. People have reliable information available because, again, media are there, but fact-checking organizations are very strong. People, we provide information, and information is there in all the languages. We have this question of the platforms, but again, it's addressed via legislation now, and it's in the phase of enforcement. And they also make a lot of efforts to promote genuine information on elections. We've seen now reference points by Google, but also even on TikTok, a kind of information space on how elections are organized. So they are making their share of efforts. It has to be acknowledged. So we know it's a risk. We see disinformation happening in all the national elections with an effect that can differ from country to country. Again, countries that have a less resilient civil society or just society tend to fall for it more. If you think, for example, in the EU, to the difficulties that Slovakia is facing or Hungary might be facing, for example, it can be, for example, a case for concern.
Can you be maybe more specified about Slovakia? What did you mean? Can you give me an example?
Meaning we have seen important disinformation attempts ahead of national elections. But again, we've seen that in Bulgaria, we've seen that in Greece, we've seen that in other countries in the Netherlands. But we've seen that in Slovakia, it was very intense in the last weeks before the elections, using also artificial intelligence to also try to influence the result of elections. So we know it's a risk, we know it's present, and it's something that we work together on. Again, the political instances have done their work with a lot of legislation. There's a lot of work being done by all authorities, but a lot by civil society, by fact-checking organization, by teachers in their classrooms, teaching children to or your youngsters to know better how to decode social media. I would say to the older generation too, because they are less understanding of the way that sometimes social media works. So it's very important to address this part of the population too. Again, risk is present, and it can be efficient, and we know in some parts of the world it has been efficient because we've seen the storming of Capitol. We've seen the storming of the Brazilian parliament. We are not at this stage at the European level, but we need to be prepared. We are pre-warned. We have done a lot of work. The members of this European Parliament have done a lot of work over the past 5 years together with the Commission, with the External Action Service. So we can also say that the risks is higher, but also the preparation, the level of readiness is also very different than 2019.
Thank you so much for your time and for this interview. I hope we'll have another chance to talk again about this.
Yes,
topic.
Thank you very much, Monika. It was a pleasure.
As well. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.